Hello, my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance. It's Tom Hatzis, your psychedelic historian, and this is the history of Santa's costume. It is claimed by many today that the red and white from Santa's outfit derives from the red and white of the amanita muscaria mushroom. But just how true is this? In this video, which is a clip from my larger talk, The Origins of the Psychedelic Santa Story, I go over the history of Santa Claus's costume to see when, if ever, the amanita muscaria enters the picture. Also, if you're into real psychedelic history, please give this video a like and a share, and don't forget to subscribe to my Psychedelic Historian YouTube channel. You could also find me on Instagram at Psychedelic Historian. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, before moving forward with all of this, I need to offer a quick analogy in the form of a short hypothetical story. I want you to imagine for a moment that you have been taken prisoner in a foreign country, and you're going to be executed by firing squad. There's 50 sharpshooters, and the guard made sure to tell you that there were 50, just to make you sweat a little bit. And so they walk into the cell, they put a blindfold over your eyes, they tie your hands behind your back, and they walk you out to this big pole in the ground, and they tie you to the pole, and you're feeling like, holy shit, I'm in a line of fire. There's 50 sharpshooters pointed at me. And then you hear the clicking of the rifles, and you hear ready, aim, fire, and you take your last breath as this big explosion happens. But you're still alive. What happened? Did they all miss? Did 50 sharpshooters all miss you? Or maybe did they decide, you were innocent, and the last moment we all pointed our guns at the sky instead. Or maybe they were like, hey, that politician, that's the person that said, they all turned and maybe they shot the politician instead. How did this happen? How did you survive? Well, you take your blindfold off and you see that there were 50 other prisoners. So including you, that's 51 prisoners to only 50 sharpshooters. So one of them had to miss. In historical methodology, this principle that I just articulated through that story is known as explanatory scope. What that means is that we want to have all of the relevant data before reaching a conclusion. When you had the blindfold on and thought that there were 50 sharpshooters pointing only at you, you didn't have all the relevant information. You didn't know that there were 50 other prisoners standing, well, not standing now, they're not standing anymore, but there were 50 other prisoners. With this short hypothetical analogy in mind that I hope none of you ever have to deal with, let's get back to the early 1800s, our knickerbockers and the red and white of Santa's costume, the first claim. Does it actually come from the red and white of the amanita muscaria? Now, the quote above from John Pintard about how Christmas was a time of murder and fire, okay, that same guy wanted to change the social upheaval and violence of Christmas to something a little more family-friendly. So from 1810 to 1830, he shifted his energies across different dates to hold this new kind of celebration. From December 6th, which was the first one because that was St. Nicholas Day, to January 1st, and a few days in between, finally settling on December 25th. So we could have celebrated, said to this day, let's say had Pintard chosen December, I don't know, 20th. No, that's too close. December 2nd, we wouldn't have this association with Santa Claus and Christmas today. So anyway, he eagerly sought to bring the usually disorderly public celebration into a dignified family ritual that took place in the home. And so in 1810, he commissioned what was called a broadside that featured St. Nicholas. A broadside just is like a big, large poster, and that's this right here. And you could see here, see St. Nicholas, December 6th. This was early on. He was still celebrating, and everybody was still celebrating St. Nicholas Day on December 6th, not Christmas. Now, the top of the post, so obviously, yeah, this poster was made before Pintard had this idea to move it to Christmas. Now, beneath the illustration, there is a short poem to St. Nicholas. It is written in both Dutch and English. Now you'll notice here on the English side, it says St. Nicholas, and on the Dutch side, it says Santa Claus. This is the first time in history that the name Santa Claus will appear on American soil, at least the first one we know about. This is also the moment that Saint Nick is going to start becoming Santa Claus. Now here, Saint Nick gives both rewards and punishments as indicated by the rod he was holding in his hand. You know, today Santa brings coal to naughty children. In those days, he brought the rod to naughty children. So that's why I see this young girl, she has the presents because she was being a good kid, and this kid was probably acting like an asshole. So he's got the rod. Now, the thing that's interesting, the difference between the coal we have today and the rod back in those days is that rod was supposed to be then handed over to his parents so that they could beat the shit out of him with it. As crazy, you know, that was, you know, child rearing in the early 1800s. Now, most important for our purposes, St. Nicholas's dress is that of a medieval bishop whose colors were usually white and gold, sometimes with red trimmings. Although such vestments also appeared in other colors like purple, green, and blue. Now, in this particular case, without the benefit of a colorized image, it looks like Pinter probably had in mind the white and gold based on the lack of, you know, shading, except for here to show a little bit of shade, but, you know, the lack of any kind of solid color. This Saint Nick has no power of flight, no sleigh, no reindeer, no elves, and no toy shop. The second time we actually see a representation of St. Nicholas, now specifically called Santa Claus, comes a decade later in an anonymous poem published in 1821 titled Old Santa Claus with Much Delight. Now, in this poem, the color of the costume is not mentioned because it didn't matter. I do want to say that I understand on these images, they are clearly colorized. The original images are not. I don't know when these became colorized. It happened later on. The point, though, is whenever this happened, the artist didn't care so much about the colors of Santa's costume, that on one plate, he's wearing green, and in the other, he's wearing red. That's how little it mattered. It would only be 2 years later that someone finally said something sort of distinctive, but not really about St. Nick's outfit. That was in 1823 when Clement Clarke Moore, who wrote arguably the most famous poem ever written, A Visit from St. Nick. It is here when we get our first words that actually describe the outfit. Before we just had images, now we have a description. Moore writes that St. Nick was dressed in all fur from his head to his foot. There is no mention of what color the fur was. Why? Well, because even though the kind of outfit is mentioned, nobody cared about the colors still. Think of it as a modern analogy. Think of it this way. If I were to ask you the specific details of the Tooth Fairy's outfit, you wouldn't have a clue as to what that is. Now, you know who the Tooth Fairy, we all know who the Tooth Fairy is. We all know what the Tooth Fairy does in popular mythology, and yet there is no standardized outfit for the Tooth Fairy. Santa Claus's outfit wasn't standardized in the early 1800s and all throughout the 1800s, pretty much, any more than the Tooth Fairy's outfit is standardized today. There was only one time, I should say, that during the 1800s when Santa's outfit mattered, and that was during the Civil War, when he was depicted as wearing red, white, and blue on the cover of Harper's Weekly. Now, obviously, this is the image is in black and white. Now, here's something interesting psychologically. We see this in black and white because we live in an era of colorized media. Well, back in the mid-1800s, people, their eyes and brains just filled in the colors. Like they would see the American flag here waving out over the Union soldiers, and here's St. Nick giving provisions to the Union soldiers, right? And here's his outfit. There's stars on his jacket and stripes on his knickers. Their eyes would have filled in the red, white, and blue. And some of your eyes, now that I just said that, are probably doing that right now. Now, the point here was that Thomas Nast wasn't the illustrator of this piece, wasn't making a point about Siberian shamans or amanita muscaria or anything like that. He was making a point about the barbaric institution of slavery and how having Saint Nick as this kind of patron saint of the Union will help the good guys win the war. That's what this is all about. So just to be careful, when we are making up these modern myths about mushrooms and Santa Claus and Siberian shamans, let's make sure we are not obfuscating or obscuring or completely canceling out a much deeper and far more important historical point about the barbaric institution of slavery that took place in this country. Now, once the Civil War ended, the colors of Santa's costume went back to not mattering once again. We know this because after the war, his outfit was back to going through a variety of different colors and changes. So in an 1864 version of Clement Clarke Moore's poem, the artist had every opportunity to color Santa Claus's outfit in the colors of the amanita muscaria. She chose yellow. We actually get colorized images of him now. Now, there's an advertisement for sugar plums in 1868. Here his outfit is red, white, and green. Here he is from 1902, and he's got on a green jacket with leopard print and red thigh-high or knee-high boots. So Santa Claus has gone full cougar at this point in history. About 29 years later, when when Coca-Cola adopted Santa Claus as their spokes-elf, they dropped everything but the red and white because they had already been advertising using red and white years before Santa Claus even entered the picture. And while Coca-Cola originally put cocaine in their drink, hence the Coca from Coca-Cola, they never once put the amanita muscaria in it. So knowing the history of how Santa's outfit changed over time, it becomes difficult to hold on to the idea that it was based on the color schemes of the amanita muscaria mushroom. Otherwise, those two colors, red and white, would have been present and unchanged from the beginning. Instead, we get a natural unfolding of history over time. When we think only of the red and white, when we think only as we understand it today, we are not realizing that there are 50 other prisoners, and therefore don't realize that we don't have all of the relevant information. Once we have all of the relevant information, the idea that Santa's costume is based on the mushroom becomes totally untenable.